Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome back to the bonus episodes that we've been doing every Friday. And as you know, we usually cover some sort of question or theme that has come up around what we have covered in our Rom-Com Vom episode that week. But today, we welcome back Dr. Gretchen Sisson. We're so excited to have her. If you haven't listened to Wednesday's episode, highly recommend pausing this and going to listen to the Juno episode that we just did with Rom-Com Vom this past Wednesday. But if you didn't listen to that, let me introduce Gretchen. She is incredible. She's a sociologist studying abortion and adoption at UCSF, and she's the author of Relinquished, The Politics of Adoption and the Privilege of American Motherhood. Her work has been cited in the Supreme Court dissent for Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, and she's written extensively about the realities of adoption in the U.S. Gretchen, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm very excited that you're here. This is a different bonus episode than usual because typically I'll kind of, go over one major question and then answer it solo. But because we have an expert in the house, I'm very excited that you're here to answer some follow-up questions that we had that we didn't necessarily have time to get to from our Wednesday Rom-Com Vom episode. And so, we're gonna go over a little bit about your research and your book and your experiences, because you've done hundreds of interviews with mothers who have relinquished their babies for adoption. And so we're very excited to learn more from you. And so here's our first follow-up. In Juno, adoption is framed as the natural alternative to abortion, but your research shows that that's not what most people with unplanned pregnancies are choosing. So I'm wondering, why is that, and what have you learned from birth mothers in your research?
Adoption is relatively very rare compared to any other pregnancy choice that someone can make. So there's about 4 million births each year in the United States. The vast majority of those children are raised by their parents, their biological parents. Of that 4 million, you have about 20,000 or so private infant adoptions. So those are the relinquishments, right? Where the parents are terminating their own parental rights to allow someone else to legally become the parent of their child. So 20,000 out of 4 million. And this is in contrast to about 800,000 to 1 million abortions per year. So abortions are incredibly common reproductive experiences. About 25% of women will have an abortion at some point in their reproductive lives. 86% will give birth. About half of 1% will relinquish an infant. So parenting, obviously a very common experience. Abortion, a very common experience. Adoption is very comparably rare. And I think that that's important to understand, because when we talk about pregnancy options, we treat all three of these choices as kind of like equally available, or we act like people are actively choosing between abortion and adoption when they are not. So most women who have abortions because most people who have abortions because they do not want to be pregnant anymore. And it's that simple. They're not interested in parenting. They're not interested in continuing the pregnancy. They don't want to give birth. There was one survey of abortion patients that asked if they were interested in adoption at all. 99% said no. 1% said kind of. 0 said yes. 0 said yes. People having abortions are uninterested in adoption. And that is true even if they can't access that abortion. They want to have an abortion. They're there to get that abortion on that day. They're turned away from accessing abortion. Of that group of women, we found that 91% of them were parenting the child to whom they gave birth as a result of the abortion denial. Only 9% are relinquishing that infant for adoption. So that 9% is astronomical when you compare it to the 0.5% of our overall birth rate, but it's still very small, right? The vast majority of people denied access to abortions are parenting. On the other hand, when I have interviewed mothers who have relinquished, very few of them tried to get an abortion. Only about a quarter of them even thought about having an abortion, and most of them ruled it out very quickly. They might think about it, but they move on quickly. They're not interested in it. Um, and then you have the smaller group that do try, but they don't think about adoption until after abortion is off the table because they ruled it out, they decided against it, they don't want to get one, or they can't get one. They're not actively choosing between the two. And I think that that's a critical difference. Most mothers who relinquish continue their pregnancies because they want a parent. And it's not until they get towards the end of their pregnancy, and they don't have the financial resources, they don't have the social support, maybe their partner isn't supporting them the way that they hoped or wanted. Maybe their own parents are saying, you can live with us, but not if you're bringing a baby home. You see a lot of those kind of crises that make parenting just feel deeply untenable at the end of the pregnancy. That's when they turn to adoption. And so this constant framing of abortion and adoption is a political construct. It has almost no resemblance to how women are actually making decisions about their pregnancy. So this framing of comparing abortion and adoption is a political construct. It has almost no resemblance to how women are actually thinking about their pregnancy options.
Wow. I feel like that just completely, opens my eyes to the consistent political debate around, well, just can give your baby up for adoption if you don't have abortion resources. And as we know, that is not what reproductive justice looks like. Reproductive justice is people being able to make decisions about their own bodies and their own children and their own pregnancies in order to decide what's best for them and their families. So that I really appreciate you framing that in that way. I feel like it is very eye-opening and enlightening. You alluded to this a little bit, but I'd love to get into a little bit more. Many of the birth mothers that you've interviewed felt forced into adoption because they didn't have the resources to parent. Like you kind of spoke about the fact that, it's more common. The most likely scenario is that people are deciding to go the adoption route and relinquish their babies for adoption, at birth or after birth and not during their first and second trimesters. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to how, this kind of idea of, folks not having the resources to parent, which is the reason why they most likely want to relinquish, challenges the way that adoption is framed in our culture and in our politics.
Well, we view adoption as something very beautiful, right? Because we focus on the families that are formed from adoption rather than the families that are separated from adoption. And I said this in the Juno episode because I think it's actually one of the things that is accurate about the movie is that the class difference between Juno and Mark and Vanessa, because adoption is really about moving children from poor families and parents and communities to more affluent families. And I think that underlies that reveals really some of the underlying conditions, which is that the mothers are relinquishing because they can't afford, they don't have capacity for whatever they believe is necessary for them to parent successfully. They want to parent, the vast majority of them, but they can't afford a security deposit on an apartment, which means that they can't move out of their unsupportive parents' house. They can't leave their unsafe partner to get that sort of stability and safety that they think they need to raise their child. Maybe they already have children. So adoption relinquishment used to be about delaying parenthood. Like Juno, you'd have a young girl who is going to relinquish this baby and then will raise children later on, probably when she's married in kind of more acceptable circumstances. And what we're seeing increasingly is that mothers who relinquish are relinquishing their second, third, fourth child because they don't have capacity to parent one more child. This is nothing to do with how capable they are of parenting. It has everything to do with whether they can afford to parent. And I saw that again and again among the mothers that I interviewed, that they maybe had a baby very quickly and they couldn't balance having another one. They couldn't afford to have another child that quickly. And I think that those examples are particularly interesting because we have this idea that, and it does it in Juno, where Juno says, like, I'm ill-equipped, right? These mothers that I interviewed are not particularly ill-equipped to parent. Many of them could be or already are very loving, capable mothers, but they don't have the safety net that makes it feel possible at the time.
It's so interesting just because I've been, and so many people have been fed this idea of like adoption v abortion. I'm like automatically thinking through
Yeah.
kind of the talking points that like I, as a, sex educator, have learned just around like people who choose to get abortions, which is just that like 2/3 of folks who choose to get abortions are already parents, right? So just thinking through, and I know again, we got to deprogram our minds to think of like the comparison because it sounds like it's very different, circumstances. But the one through line for me is that these mothers have thought deeply about these decisions. They have taken stock of like what they're able to do based on their circumstances and based on what their experiences are and their financial situations and what's in the best interest of the child in the case of adoption. And it just feels like it's shifting. My mind is turning, essentially, is like what I'm trying to share.
I think the other piece is that these mothers are not sorting through this on their own, right? So they have whatever support or lack of support exists in their lives. But once they are in conversation with adoption agencies, the agency is a very critical player in this space. So one thing we commonly misunderstand about adoption is that we believe there are all these babies in need of homes, when in fact we have up to 45 prospective parents for every baby that's available for adoption in this country. So you have a market-based system with extremely high demand, which means that agencies are very motivated to generate more supply of babies. And it's really uncomfortable to use this like commodified language when you're talking about human beings, but it's also accurate. Like I do that intentionally because I think it's very important to understand the way that even nonprofit agencies are going to be motivated to make children available for adoption. And so you have a lot of mothers, as they are deciding what to do, who are interacting with agencies that will engage from like merely manipulative practices to sometimes straight up fraudulent practices in the course of these adoptions. Most states do not require a relinquishing mother to have her own attorney. A lot of times the only lawyer in the room will be the lawyer hired by the adoptive parents, which is true in Juno, actually. They don't have anyone explain to them what they are signing. They don't have anyone explain to them that open adoption agreements are not legally binding in most cases. And even if they are, they're very hard to enforce or adjudicate. They don't have anyone talking to them about what other options might be. Like, oh, you're relinquishing this baby because you don't have stable housing. Well, here are some resources for affordable housing. I'm not trying to act like it's that easy. Like we live in a country with a housing crisis of, but you don't have anybody saying like, here's what this could look like if you do want to raise your child, because everyone in the room is motivated to ensure that the adoption occurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. The 45 to 1 baby is so interesting to think about as well.
The researcher in me wants to put a big asterisk after that because we actually don't have good data on this. The CDC numbers, if they are accurate, I have questions about whether or not they are. They might be an undercount. That's what they work out to is 45 to 1. So just with my academic hat is required to say, like, we actually don't have good hard numbers on this. But even if it's only half that, right, then you still have this very high demand.
I could easily sit here talking to you about this for another 5 hours. But alas, we have come to the end. This has been really such a fascinating conversation. I'm so appreciative of your expertise and your research. We will be doing a book giveaway, so look out for that, folks, on the Sex Ed with DB podcast Instagram. And definitely go back and listen to our Rom-Com Vom episode about Juno if you're interested in learning more about the politics and the realities of adoption and abortion in the U.S. From Gretchen. So Gretchen, thank you so much for being in 2 episodes of Sex Ed with DB this week. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Our creator, host, and executive producer is me, Danielle Bezalel, aka DB. Our producer is Sadie Levy. Our communications lead is Katherine Cohen. Our marketing coordinator is Alex Bateman. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds. Thanks so much to our featured guests, partners, and listeners. If you have a rom-com you remember from growing up and want us to cover it on Rom-Com Bomb, submit it to us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and leaving a comment on Spotify. Want to partner with us? Email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. For more sex ed content, follow us on Instagram @sexedwithdbpodcast. See you next time.